They say that in the corporate jungle, survival of the fittest means being the loudest, the flashiest, the one who can spin the most convincing bullshit. But I've always found that the real predators are the quiet ones. The ones lurking in the server room, bathed in the hum of cooling fans, their eyes glued to glowing screens. The ones who speak in code, literally and figuratively. And for the last 7 years, I was that predator. Mark, they called me. Or rather, they didn't call me anything. I was the IT guy. The guy who made the Wi-Fi work. The guy who could magically fix the printer when they decided to stage a paper jam protest. The guy who knew where every misplaced Ethernet cable went to die. My official title? Senior Systems Administrator. My actual job description? Chief Architect of not letting this whole damn operation implode. And honestly, most days, it felt like I was holding up the entire building with nothing but a few lines of PowerShell and a healthy dose of caffeine. The executives? They were the ones who got the corner offices, the fancy titles, the public accolades for innovative strategies that were usually just regurgitated buzzwords they'd heard in a podcast. They were the ones who walked around like they owned the place, which, technically, they did. But they forgot who kept the lights on. They forgot who ensured the digital infrastructure supporting their every ambitious whim was actually functioning. They saw me as a utility, like the electricity or the plumbing. Necessary, sure, but utterly unremarkable, until something went wrong. And when something went wrong, it was always my fault, wasn't it? My boss, Mr. Sterling, Nathan Sterling, the man was a walking, talking embodiment of corporate arrogance. He wore suits that cost more than my car, drove a car that cost more than my house, and spoke in a language composed entirely of synergistic paradigms, disruptive innovation, and scalable solutions. He'd sweep into the office every morning, smelling vaguely of expensive cologne and desperation, radiating an aura of self-importance that could curdle milk at 50 paces. His main talent seemed to be delegating anything remotely resembling actual work and taking credit for anything that vaguely resembled success. He was the kind of executive who'd say, "Let's circle back" more often than he'd say hello. And his idea of problem solving was to blame someone else, usually me, even if the problem was a jammed coffee machine. And I, in my quiet, unassuming way, always fixed it. The coffee machine, the printer, the server that threatened to overheat because someone forgot to clean the dust filters for 3 years. I was the invisible glue holding this rickety corporate ship together. I knew the system's every creak and groan, its every vulnerability, its every hidden strength. I'd built most of it, tinkered with it, optimized it. I'd set up the firewalls, configured the VPNs, and, most importantly, I'd designed and implemented the data backup and recovery system. A robust, 30-day rolling backup, a digital safety net that ensured no matter what happened, we could always recover lost data. It was a project I championed for months, painstakingly explaining its necessity to a management team whose eyes glazed over faster than a donut in a bakery window. They finally approved it, begrudgingly, seeing it as just another line item in the IT budget. They never asked how it worked, or who controlled it. Why would they? It was just IT. The whole charade came to a head last Tuesday. It was a Tuesday like any other, humid, oppressive, the kind of day where the air conditioning felt like it was being run by hamsters on tiny treadmills. I was deep in the bowels of the server rack, coaxing a particularly stubborn network switch back into submission when my phone buzzed. A notification from the executive server, unusual. Most of them couldn't find the power button, let alone access that particular network segment. Curiosity, a trait that's both my greatest asset and my personal kryptonite, got the better of me. I pulled up the logs remotely, and that's when I saw it. Nathan Sterling, CEO, was logged into the executive server, attempting to delete files. Large, critical files. Financial reports, audit trails, project proposals. He was frantically trying to scrub data, his digital fingerprint leaving a messy trail of panic across the logs. It was like watching a toddler try to erase crayon marks from a freshly painted wall. He was too clumsy, too obvious. The timestamps, the IP addresses, the aborted deletion attempts, it was all there. He was trying to delete the evidence of his own fraud. I could almost picture him, sweating in his expensive suit, his usually smug face contorted in a mask of desperate fear. He was like a rat trying to gnaw his way out of a trap, only he was only making the trap tighter. And he'd forgotten about me. He'd forgotten about the guy who knew exactly how the digital rat trap worked. My heart didn't pound with fear or even righteous anger. It felt cold, calculating. It was the quiet thrill of seeing a flawed algorithm about to execute. Sterling had made his move. A desperate, clumsy, fundamentally stupid move. He thought he was covering his tracks. He thought he was safe. But in his haste, in his sheer hubris, he'd made one colossal oversight. He'd forgotten about the 30-day rolling backup. My 30-day rolling backup. A system he barely understood. A system he signed off on without a second thought. A system that was now his digital guillotine. I continued working on the network switch, my fingers moving with practiced ease, but my mind was racing. This wasn't just about a disgruntled employee or a corporate skirmish. This was about blatant, textbook fraud. And Sterling had just handed me the smoking gun, digital style. He tried to delete the evidence, but he'd only managed to make it more irrefutable. He tried to erase history, but all he'd done was highlight it. He tried to bury the truth, but he'd only dug a deeper grave for himself. The rest of the day was a blur of calculated calm. I finished my tasks, ran my diagnostics, and responded to the usual deluge of "my password is," and the printer's jammed again. Emails with my usual quiet efficiency. Nobody suspected a thing. Why would they? I was just Mark, the IT guy, the invisible backbone, the guy who cleaned up messes, literal and digital. But inside, a storm was brewing. A digital storm meticulously planned and waiting for its moment. I didn't feel like I was being fired. I felt like I was being unleashed. Sterling thought he was ending my career. He had no idea he was just giving me the best severance package imaginable, access to the truth and the keys to his undoing. By the time I clocked out, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that seemed to mock the sterile gray of the office building. I drove home, not with the slumped shoulders of a defeated employee, but with the determined stride of a predator who just spotted its prey. My apartment smelled of lemon polish and old books, a sanctuary of order in a chaotic world. I kicked off my shoes, the familiar click on the hardwood a small comfort. I didn't go straight to the couch. I went to my home office. A small space, crammed with monitors, keyboards, and the quiet hum of my personal rig. This was my domain, my digital fortress. I opened my personal encrypted drive. Not the company's network, not the servers I managed, but my drive. The one I kept disconnected from the network, the one that held my own personal archives. Backups of backups, logs of logs, and most importantly, the master logs for the company's 30-day rolling backup system. Sterling's frantic deletion spree had been logged in excruciating detail. Every failed attempt, every file he'd managed to corrupt, every moment he'd spent desperately trying to cover his tracks. And I had them. Every single bit. I poured myself a generous glass of whiskey. Not the cheap stuff, but a good single malt I'd been saving. I took a slow sip, the burn a welcome contrast to the cold calculation in my mind. Sterling thought he'd outsmarted the system. He thought he'd buried the evidence. He thought he made me disappear. He was wrong on all counts. He just made it easier. Much, much easier. Because when you're the one who builds the safety net, you know exactly where to find the loose threads. And Sterling? He'd just given me the spool. This wasn't going to be a brawl. This was going to be a meticulously executed digital forensic investigation. And I was the lead detective, the prosecutor, and the judge. And Sterling? He was already convicted. The only question was, how loudly would the verdict echo? I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating my face, and began to type. The first step in dismantling a fraudulent empire. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring order. And sometimes restoring order means starting a small, controlled fire. The silence in my apartment wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a deliberate, calculated hush. Sterling had been a storm, a hurricane of ego and incompetence that had blown through my life. And then, he thought, blown me away. But hurricanes recede, and when they do, the debris is often a testament to their destruction, but also to the resilience of what remained. And what remained was the meticulous order of my digital life. The carefully curated archives I maintained, the offsite backups, the detailed logs of every system action. These weren't just IT best practices. They were my insurance policy, my contingency plan for a world where people like Sterling held power. My personal workstation hummed with a quiet efficiency that mirrored my own internal state. The whiskey had done its job not to intoxicate, but to sharpen the edges of my focus. I opened my encrypted drive, the digital equivalent of a locked vault. Inside lay the raw data, the unvarnished truth of Sterling's panic. The logs from the executive server weren't just a record of his attempted cover-up. They were a narrative of his downfall, written in timestamps and failed commands. I began to organize. Emails, Sterling's frantic late-night messages to his sycophantic legal team, begging for ways to contain a security breach. His words, not mine. I cross-referenced these with the IT support tickets, the ones he'd undoubtedly instructed his clueless assistant to file, attempting to make his digital vandalism look like a random hack. Each one was a tiny thread woven into a tapestry of deceit. I found the project proposals he'd tried to delete, the ones detailing the inflated budgets and the ghost contractors he'd conjured, the audit trails, the financial reports that would expose the true extent of his malfeasance. It was all there, laid bare by his own clumsy hands. Then there were the contracts. The original vendor agreements for the outsourced marketing campaign he'd commissioned, the one that had mysteriously ballooned in cost by 300% in 6 months. I had the initial quotes, the revised proposals, and crucially, the emails where Sterling had personally greenlit the exorbitant increases, overriding the usual procurement protocols. He'd done it all via his personal email, a digital trail as obvious as a billboard in a desert. He'd forgotten that I, the lowly IT guy, had access to network traffic logs, to proxy server records, to the very arteries of the company's digital lifeblood. I created a series of secure folders, each meticulously labeled. Sterling's deletions, executive server, fraudulent vendor contracts, audit trail manipulation, executive communications, evidence of collusion. Each folder was a self-contained indictment, the evidence stacked with ruthless precision. I even recreated his frantic attempt to delete the backup logs themselves, showing how he'd inadvertently triggered my custom alerts, not by successfully deleting them, but by attempting to access them. My system was designed to flag unauthorized access or deletion attempts on critical infrastructure before they happened. He hadn't just failed to cover his tracks, he'd drawn the spotlight on them. As I worked, the hum of my own rig was a soothing counterpoint to the chaos I was uncovering. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about restoration. About making sure the system, the company, and frankly, the concept of meritocracy wasn't permanently damaged by one man's insatiable greed. The next morning, the digital whispers began. My phone, which I'd intentionally kept on silent, buzzed with an unusual number of notifications. Old colleagues, people I shared countless late nights and lukewarm coffees with, were reaching out. Mark, are you seeing the chaos? Read one text from Sarah in accounting. The entire financial reporting system is down. No one can access anything. Sterling is having a meltdown. Another came from David in marketing. Dude, what's going on? We missed the client deadline for the Q3 report. Sterling's gone ballistic. Says it's an IT issue. Sound familiar? The IT issue was a classic Sterling deflection. I hadn't touched any of the core financial systems. My focus had been solely on the executive server, on Sterling's direct actions, and the backup logs. But his desperate attempts to control the narrative, to blame IT, were starting to unravel his own carefully constructed facade. If the financial systems were down, it meant his attempts to manipulate data had likely caused a cascade failure. Or perhaps his frantic deletion spree had inadvertently impacted systems he hadn't even intended to touch. Then, a company-wide email landed in my personal inbox, forwarded by Sarah. Subject: urgent system outage, IT department investigation. It was from HR, a generic boilerplate about an ongoing technical investigation, and apologies for the inconvenience. Sterling's name was nowhere to be found, of course. He was the victim, the one being inconvenienced by the supposed incompetence of his own IT department. The irony was almost too much to bear. The panic was palpable, even from my quiet apartment. I could sense it through the fragmented messages, the digital echoes of a company spiraling. They were starting to feel my absence, not because I was a beloved colleague, but because the very infrastructure they took for granted was starting to creak and groan without its silent custodian. Sterling, in his desperate attempt to erase evidence, had effectively crippled the very systems he was trying to protect. He tried to burn down the house to hide a single burnt toast. My own actions, however, were far more precise. I hadn't caused the system outage, but I had the power to leverage the ensuing chaos. The crucial element was that Sterling's actions had alerted my advanced warning system, triggering a protocol I'd built in for precisely this kind of scenario. He'd tried to delete the backup logs, which was a severe security breach. My system, in response, had initiated a temporary read-only lockdown of all sensitive executive data, flagging it for immediate review by an independent auditor. It wasn't a full system shutdown, but a surgical isolation of the compromised elements. The trap was sprung. Sterling, convinced he was a digital ghost, had blundered directly into a digital minefield. His panic, his clumsy attempts at sabotage, had confirmed the integrity of my monitoring systems and triggered a chain of events that were now far beyond his control. He tried to erase his digital footprint, and in doing so, he left an indelible mark of his guilt. I opened a new email. This one was addressed to a select few recipients, the head of the company's external audit firm, a legal counsel I'd vetted for their integrity and discretion, and surprisingly, the company's board of directors, not Sterling, not HR. This was about presenting the facts unvarnished and undeniable to those who held the ultimate authority. The subject line was simple: urgent, evidence of financial irregularities and data tampering, immediate review required. The body of the email was concise, devoid of emotion, and packed with irrefutable data. I attached a compiled dossier, a digital manifestation of Sterling's downfall. It contained the logs of his unauthorized access, the screenshots of his deletion attempts, the original and manipulated financial reports, the inflated vendor contracts, and a summary of his communications with his legal team. I highlighted the specific timestamps, the IP addresses, the file names. I also included a brief explanation of my 30-day rolling backup system and how Sterling's actions had triggered an automated security protocol necessitating an independent audit of the affected executive data. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand. I simply presented the facts, letting the evidence speak for itself. I concluded with a simple, yet chilling, statement. Given the critical nature of the information and the apparent attempts to conceal it, I believe immediate external oversight is imperative to ensure transparency and protect the company's interests. I hit send. The digital ripples of Sterling's panic had been my overture. Now, the auditor's investigation, triggered by my carefully laid evidence, would be the prelude to his symphony of destruction. The company was already in disarray, blaming phantom IT issues. They suspected the problem, but they didn't yet understand the scale of it, or who was truly holding the conductor's baton. Sterling thought he was a phantom, a ghost in the machine. He was about to learn that some ghosts leave very solid evidence behind. The silence that followed my email was deafening, at least in my personal world. The company, however, was a symphony of escalating chaos. News of the unforeseen system failures and the comprehensive internal audit had leaked like water through a sieve. Text messages from former colleagues, usually filled with office gossip or weekend plans, now carried a frantic undertone. "Mark, have you heard anything? The auditors are everywhere. Sterling looks like he's seen a ghost. Everyone's on edge. They're saying the Q3 numbers are so bad, the board might actually step in." The paranoia was a welcome aroma. Then came the call. It wasn't a text, not a forwarded email. It was a direct, unlisted number that flashed on my personal phone. The caller ID was blocked, a sign of desperation. I let it ring twice, savoring the anticipation, before answering. Mark, a strained voice, barely recognizable as Sterling's usual booming arrogance, stammered, "It's Sterling. We need to talk. Urgently." I took a slow sip of my coffee, the warmth a stark contrast to the icy calm that had settled over me. "Sterling, to what do I owe the unexpected pleasure?" "Don't play games with me, Mark. This whole audit, this is because of you, isn't it? You sabotaged the systems, didn't you?" His voice, attempting to regain its authority, was thin and reedy. "Sabotage? Sterling? That's a strong word. Perhaps you mean ensuring the integrity of the systems? Or perhaps documenting the actions of someone who attempted to compromise them?" I kept my tone measured, almost conversational. "I believe the auditors are looking at a rather extensive digital footprint. Yours, specifically." A strangled sound came from the other end, somewhere between a cough and a whimper. "You can't do this. I'm the CEO. You were just IT. And you, Sterling, were the one with the elevated privileges." I countered smoothly. "The one who decided to try and delete critical data. The one who forgot about the 30-day rolling backup. The one who, in his haste, tripped every single alarm I had in place. A rather elaborate alarm system, wouldn't you agree? Designed to catch precisely this kind of unforeseen operational event." He was silent for a long moment, the only sound his ragged breathing. Then, a shift. The desperation hardened into a brittle plea. "Mark, we can fix this. We can make this right. What do you want?" Ah, the million-dollar question. The moment of truth. Not just for Sterling, but for the company itself. I opened a new document on my personal laptop. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about consequence. It was about balance. "I want two things, Sterling," I began, my voice unwavering, "and you, or rather the board, will have a choice to make." I let the silence hang, allowing the weight of his predicament to sink in. He knew I had him. He spent years believing I was a disposable cog, a background hum. Now that hum was about to become a deafening roar. "Option A," I continued, "is the path of least resistance for everyone involved. You resign immediately, with a public statement acknowledging your personal reasons for stepping down. The current board is informed of the findings, and they quietly begin a search for a competent replacement. My evidence is presented, but not widely disseminated. The auditors complete their review, identify any necessary procedural changes, and the company moves forward, hopefully with a better understanding of the value of its technical infrastructure. There will be no prosecution, no public scandal, no financial ruin. For you, it's a swift, quiet exit, preserving what little dignity you have left." I paused, letting the terms sink in. It was a generous offer, considering the mountain of evidence I possessed. But it wasn't about being magnanimous. It was about ensuring the company didn't implode completely. "And option B?" Sterling whispered, his voice a threat. "Option B," I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming sharper, more precise, "is the nuclear option. The board reviews the full scope of your fraudulent activities as documented in my findings. They will see the doctored financial reports, the ghost contracts, the attempts to cover your tracks. This evidence will be turned over to the relevant regulatory bodies, Securities and Exchange Commission, financial crime units. The company will face massive fines, potentially debilitating lawsuits from shareholders and clients. Your name will be synonymous with corporate malfeasance. The stock will plummet, key clients will flee. The company, as you know it, will cease to exist." I let that sink in. The stark contrast between the two options was the leverage. He had tried to erase my work to erase me. Now I was holding the pen, and he was the ink. "I will require a written agreement, drafted and approved by the board, that outlines your immediate resignation, the agreed upon statement, and a binding non-disclosure agreement regarding the details of your departure. My full findings will be shared with a pre-designated board member who will then present them to the full board. They have 48 hours to respond. If I don't have a signed agreement by then, option B becomes the default. The line went silent again, a long, heavy pause filled with the unspoken weight of his impending doom. I could almost picture him, pale and sweating in his expensive suit, the carefully constructed facade crumbling around him. Finally, his voice, shaky but resolute, returned. You wouldn't. Sterling, I said, my voice hardening slightly. You fired me. You attempted to erase my contributions. You committed fraud. I'm not playing games. This is about accountability. About making sure that the systems I built, the company I dedicated 7 years of my life to, isn't destroyed by one man's ego. He didn't respond immediately. I imagined him pacing, perhaps making desperate calls to his lawyer, to his equally compromised associates. But there was no one left who could help him. His own actions had isolated him. Who is this designated board member? He finally asked, his voice barely audible. That will be decided by the board, I replied. They know who among them values transparency and the company's long-term survival. The auditor's initial report will be shared with them. They'll understand the gravity of the situation. They'll know precisely what's at stake. The call ended abruptly, leaving me in the quiet hum of my apartment. The silence this time was different. It wasn't the calculated hush of preparation, but the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed. The next 48 hours were a tense, quiet vigil. My phone remained silent, but my email inbox was a flurry of activity. The auditors had indeed confirmed my findings. Their preliminary report a brutal confirmation of Sterling's fraud. They'd flagged my involvement as crucial in uncovering the depth of the malfeasance. I received a formal communication from the board's legal counsel, acknowledging receipt of my evidence and confirming their intention to review the options presented. Then, on the morning of the second day, a notification arrived, a secure digital signature from the board, an executed agreement. Sterling was out. The public statement was brief, citing personal reasons and a desire to pursue new ventures. The stock dipped, but not catastrophically. The auditors were brought in to lead a comprehensive review, and a search for a new CEO was immediately launched. I didn't attend the board meetings, didn't demand a public apology, or a hefty severance package. That wasn't the point. The point was restoring order. My final act was simple. I sent one last email, this time to the new interim leadership, a group of experienced professionals tasked with steering the company through the transition. I attached a comprehensive handover document outlining the critical systems, upcoming maintenance schedules, and best practices for data security. I even included a revised IT budget, one that reflected the true cost of maintaining robust infrastructure, not the shoestring operation Sterling has so readily accepted. I concluded with a simple sentence. My role as Senior Systems Administrator has been fulfilled. I am resigning my position effective immediately. And then I walked away. My new reality wasn't a lavish mansion or private jet. It was a quiet cabin nestled in the mountains, a place where the only hum was the wind through the pines, and the only network traffic was the exchange of information between the trees. I had access to capital, yes, but more importantly, I had my time. I had the freedom to pursue projects that genuinely interested me, to build systems that prioritized truth and efficiency, not just profit margins and ego. Sterling's fate was a quiet footnote in the business news, rumors of financial irregularities and a swift, unceremonious departure. No jail time, perhaps, but his reputation was in tatters. His career as a corporate titan effectively over. He'd tried to erase me, but in doing so, he'd merely written his own epitaph. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, a sense of profound peace settled over me. It wasn't the thrill of revenge, but the quiet satisfaction of justice served, of order restored. The system had been broken, and I, the quiet one in the server room, had fixed it. If watching corporate hubris meet its match, and seeing meticulous planning triumph over arrogant incompetence resonates with you, consider liking this story. and subscribing for more tales of calculated corporate justice. Because sometimes the most powerful moves are the ones made in silence, with nothing but code and consequence. The quiet ones, after all, are the ones who truly understand the system.